How's your general knowledge? Well, I'm convinced you'll get this one right, as it's personal to you. What's the one thing that's made the once impossible possible?
It was a miracle where my mum felt convicted with that attitude shift of, okay, wait a second, my son who has no limbs, the government says he's not allowed to go to school. But her attitude is no. They went to the courts and they changed the law.
Nick Fuchsic on Making the Impossible Possible, whose story can be viewed in its entirety on YouTube, details of which can be obtained by going to talkingpoint.site. Hello and a very warm welcome to this, the second part of our two-part podcast on accessibility, where today we are celebrating the thing that made the once impossible possible.
This is Kilo Charlie 1, Uniform Bravo Papa.
Cutting across technology,
Power on,
and the human spirit.
So I started off with a shortwave radio, and it got me into sort of scanning different frequencies. And I used to make antennas out of bits of foil and all sorts of things, and string wire antennas up my bedroom walls and all kinds of things. I had a lot of fun doing that, and I got my first CB radio at age 13. And after that, I never looked back really.
Martin Rhodes on the highs of amateur radio. Where with just 2 years to go before its 100th birthday, British Wireless for the Blind is entering a new phase of its development and looking for your input.
I've always loved radio. It's always been a fascination of mine. You know, it really becomes kind of a friend in the corner of the room that's kind of always there.
We hear from the charity's technology controller, David Beard.
Obviously, joining British Wireless for the Blind Fund, has allowed me to really see the importance of that more than anything else nowadays. For many people, it obviously becomes a complete lifeline and a necessity.
And we'll also be joined by the life coach and self-care practitioner, Angela Peake.
I was diagnosed with having chronic renal failure at the age of 17. My first transplant failed, so I trained as a nurse whilst living a life of having chronic renal failure.
Part 2.
British Wireless for the Blind Fund is a national charity supporting those living with sight loss in the UK with audio equipment.
Impossible.
That go from our standard radios as well as our online stream service.
Is possible.
That just simply unlocks the internet and makes things accessible and also usable, more importantly.
The programme that I've developed is called Replenished, and I support committed but exhausted healthcare professionals to become who they should always have been and should always be.
Do get in touch. You can send a text or WhatsApp voice note to 07948 568 191. Email info@talkingpoint.site. I'm Philip Anderson, and this is Talking Point. Hey folks, it's good to have you on board. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start with a big shout out to a number of you who've joined us in recent weeks. Big hello to Lee Jessup listening to us over in Worcester. Hi there. Georgia Tams in Stoke-on-Trent, a big hello to you too. And Ruthie Boots, not sure where you're actually listening today, Ruth, because we don't have a location for you, but lovely to have you on board. And that's the beauty of podcasts, I think. It doesn't matter where in the world you happen to be listening. We're all part of this one family. Thank you very much indeed. Or you could be listening in space, couldn't you? Mars, if you happen to have the money to travel there. Although as much as I love space exploration, I don't think I'd be travelling to Mars anytime soon. It's just that huge distance. I don't know how many months they reckon it will take. About 3, 4, 5 months, depending on the much of positioning of the planets. Yeah, it's once you've left planet Earth, you've just got, well, all that space. And no way back until you've reached your destination, if you reach it. So, anyway, we could talk about that on another podcast, who knows. But if it is, for the rest of you, you haven't subscribed, can I encourage you to do so? It does help others to find us. Full details on how to do so and to get involved with the podcast is available at talkingpoint.site. We begin today with your testimonials.
The Dragon Naturally Speaking software.
You may recall a while back how I invited you to submit your own accounts of the things that made the once impossible for you possible.
Since embarking on an honours degree journey with the Open University in 2006, I've been harnessing the power of Dragon voice activation technology. This indispensable tool...
Jenny Tate on the Dragon Naturally Speaking software, whom we're going to be hearing more from later on in the programme. The first of our testimonials comes from Eo Davis, a resourceful and resilient lady whom, despite her cerebral palsy, has remained steadfast and undeterred against life's obstacles. In fact, she's found a piece of technology that has transformed her life for the better. Her story is voiced for us today by Marcia Saffron.
I was born with cerebral palsy, which affected my coordination, hearing and speech. Despite these challenges, I spent the next 6 decades living life to the fullest, embracing a fiercely independent and willful spirit. I learned to drive a car, sail a boat and ride a bike, activities many able-bodied people take for granted, yet were often surprised to discover someone like me would even contemplate. At the age of 63, while visiting family in Australia, I encountered significant health issues. My balance deteriorated, and I started experiencing severe mobility issues in my legs, alongside unbearable headaches. After undergoing numerous medical tests, the diagnosis led to a recommended operation to alleviate decompression in my neck and spinal cord, aimed at preventing paralysis. However, unforeseen complications arose, and I suffered a spinal stroke, which resulted in quadriplegia. During my rehabilitation, the staff, aware of my desire for autonomy and communication, introduced me to a small charity named Smartbox. Smartbox provided me with a computerized communication aid. With this technology, I relearned typing, utilizing the little finger of my right hand to tap a large red button. This button controlled an on-screen keyboard, allowing me to send messages and commands through an automated voice. Furthermore, I embraced other artificial intelligence solutions, such as Alexa, enabling me to operate my TV, record player, blinds and lights, as well as monitor my front door. This technology also kept me connected with family and friends via social media. Through artificial intelligence, I regained a semblance of independence, for which I am immensely grateful.
Eo, thank you very much indeed for sharing that compelling and uplifting account with us today. It certainly was one of resilience and demonstrated the human spirit in action. And I love the way you relearned how to type with the aid of Smartbox. And I'm pleased it did, because you've shared such a wonderful story with us, and I'm sure it's resonated with you listening today. And if it has, then please do let us have your texts and WhatsApp notes. You can send a voice note or a text to 07948 568 191. That's 07948 568 191. And more information on Smartbox is available at thinksmartbox.com. That's thinksmartbox.com. And there'll be more of your testimonials coming up in the podcast. don't know if you use an iPhone, but I've been using one for, goodness knows, 10 years or more now. I'm on the iPhone 13 Pro Max, and I'm probably due an upgrade. So I've got my eye on the 15 at the moment. But I have found having an iPhone has made a big difference to my life. It's given me a lot of independence as someone with sight loss. But the one thing I've always liked about Apple products generally, and the iPhones in particular, I suppose, is everything comes integrated. So you haven't got to download separate software just to make it sort of accessible. So you've got your screen reader and everything else already included. Apple have always had this inclusive sort of approach, which is what's really impressed me about their brand in particular. Whilst it's got its pluses, it does have its downsides. And the one bugbear for me happens to be audio dictation. Whether you're using Siri or whether you're using the onboard software, I've noticed over the past couple of years, and it might be longer, it's becoming less accurate. And when I'm dictating messages into it, I'm noticing on playback it's inserted words that I've not said or missed out punctuation. And what you're finding is you're spending a lot of time in post-production just rectifying the mistakes, and it can take the joy out of sending a text sometimes. I have actually invested in a portable keyboard to go with the iPhone. So I think I'm going to go back to just typing them as one would an email or a letter. But the good news is Apple have announced several new features due out on the back of iOS 18, which they're thinking of releasing in September. So yeah, this month. What we've done is we've pulled together some of these exciting new features into a report for you to listen to today.
According to Mac Rumors, which claims to have learned through industry sources, Apple is working on 3 new accessibility enhancements for iOS 18 and macOS 15. First on the list is adaptive voice shortcuts, which would allow users to map custom spoken phrases to accessibility shortcuts, enabling them to toggle features like VoiceOver, voice control, or Zoom, simply by speaking the phrase into their device. In addition, there's talk of a new categories section for the existing live speech feature. This feature will let users create categories, organize phrases into them, and assign each category an icon from a selection of around 20 options. Meanwhile, live speech, which allows users to type a phrase and have it spoken out loud, is particularly useful for those with speech impairments. While these 2 features are reportedly in development for both iOS 18 and Mac OS 15, Mac Rumors claims that Mac OS 15 will also support custom font sizes in more apps than it currently does. Books, news, stocks, tips, and weather are apparently set to receive support for this feature. While these features are reportedly in development, there's a chance Apple may scrap or delay some of them before the official release in September.
And we wait with interest on that one. As I said, Apple could end up scrapping one or all of those features. That's always the worry. But as we are now in September, and I've seen nothing to the contrary, we can safely assume, and I'm saying safely at, well, I can't even give it 99.9%, but safely assume they're going to be releasing all of those. One of the outstanding features for me in that was live speech. This is where you can type in a word or a phrase into the app and have it speak it back to you or whoever's listening. So if it is you're unable to verbalise for whatever reason, using this app will enable you to communicate to those around you. And I have a friend who I think would benefit from this, although I do believe she is using something similar and has been for quite a while. So who knows, perhaps Apple are just catching up on this one. Perhaps there's been 1 or 2 interesting features that have already been released that I've not spotted that you would like to share with us. Please do. You can text or send a voice note to 07948 568 191, or you can drop us an email, info@talkingpoint.site. When was the last time you put yourself first? When you said no to others and yes to yourself? Is self-care really selfish? Do keep listening. My next guest has the answer.
The real thing that made the big differences was community and connection. They supported me and helped me to realise how much my experience and my lived experience had to offer other people.
Angela Peake is a qualified nurse who spent part of her career in oncology.
I worked with cancer patients on the wards where we gave cancer treatments, and I also worked with end-of-life care patients as well.
She's also a wife,
We were married 33 years a couple of weeks ago.
a mum,
We had a child that was premature. He's been absolutely brilliant. He's absolutely fine. He worked at the BBC, trained at the BBC, now works in media and post-production media.
a survivor,
We had to get on with life. We had a child who was on oxygen for 2.5 years. I was in renal failure, and all of that was happening. So you had to just get on with life.
and today, a qualified coach.
The program that I've developed is called Replenished, and I support committed but exhausted healthcare professionals to take you from exhausted to energized.
Yet, for 40 years of her life, from the age of 17, Angela has been plagued by ill health.
I had a transplant that failed. There was a loss there. Things changed dramatically in 2000 for me because I was clinically extremely vulnerable. And I'm a nurse through and through, so I was concerned for my colleagues, my patients, my parents. It was a challenging time.
Eventually, Angela found peace and began to rebuild her life one step at a time, all thanks to her prized discovery that now made the once impossible possible.
When you look after you as a priority, when you put you at the centre of everything that you do, so many people find that a real challenge because they think it's selfish. I'm here to tell you that self-care is not selfish. It's vital because you can give more without destroying yourself, without getting to burnout.
And doubtless we're going to be learning more about personal self-care during the course of our discussion over the next few minutes. As I welcome to the programme for the first time Angela Peake, talking to us down the line from your home in Stoke-on-Trent, Angela. Thank you very much and welcome to Talking Point.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks a lot.
Well, before we dive into your coach training and subsequent company, AMP Consulting, you set up on the back of that, I would like to focus, if I may, to begin with, on your target audience, as I feel this will lay the contextual groundwork for our discussion today. You've opted for healthcare professionals. What's interesting, though, you use quite an interesting phrase because you say committed but exhausted healthcare professionals. And as we know, the NHS is in crisis, especially where staffing is concerned, and it's causing poor mental health and burnout amongst its workers. In fact, in 2022, only 26% of workers at the NHS said there was enough staff in their department or organisation to do their job properly, with 31% of staff in the NHS survey of 2023 saying they were unhappy about pay and working conditions, with 29% saying they often think about quitting. Is this one of the reasons why you agreed to support this area of the medical fraternity?
Absolutely. I qualified as a nurse in 1990 and I came back to nursing in 2000. And I've been back in nursing since then. But with COVID and my own health problems, life changed for me and I had to go into a different direction. So supporting healthcare professionals that live with health challenges became what I do. And I've spoken to people that actually have diabetes and they have not had the breaks, they've not had food when they know full well that they should. They've not had their injections when they should have done because their mindset is completely set on caring and looking after and doing things for others, whether that be their colleagues, whether that be the doctors that they're working with, or whether it be their patient. So they came at the very, very end of the list. Now, there was nothing that that individual was doing that was helping them at all. So when we had the conversation about doing things differently, they found it really, really difficult. People don't see that their own self-care should be a priority. And what happens then is we become very disempowered because so often when we don't put ourselves at the center and we give to everybody else, we disempower ourselves because we often will expect people to be grateful for what you're doing for them. And when they're not, you can become really resentful.
How does one get that balance right? How does one give of themselves to others while caring for themselves at the same time?
I think that's really difficult. And one of the ways of trying to get that balance right is learning to understand your boundaries, knowing when to say no. We're often not very good at that. You keep taking more and more on and keep saying yes to everything, even though in your head you're going, I don't know how I'm going to fit all this in.
Yes, I can see how that would be difficult. And if I'm honest, I'm just as guilty of saying yes when I really should be saying no. Which brings us nicely onto your own health challenges you touched on earlier. If I may recap, you had renal failure at the age of 17 while training to be a nurse. It was down to your kidney failing that your son was born 3 months premature. Then you underwent a second kidney transplant. And then later on, you were diagnosed as being clinically vulnerable, which must have all presented various challenges for you. Talk me through the impact they had on you and your health at the time and your ability to work.
Living with fatigue, that often comes with health conditions. Especially when I came back to nursing, I wasn't able to work full time anymore. I knew that I couldn't work full time, that 3 days a week was my maximum. I needed the time to replenish in between working, and working shifts was quite good for me at the time because I could be off for a few days before I came back to work again. When I started to work 9 to 5s, when I changed my role, I found that a real challenge because the constantness of working I found really, really difficult. Because of my own health challenges, working then as a more consistency was helpful for me, although it was still challenging because of that 9 to 5, and I didn't have the long stretches of days off where I really looked after myself at that point.
And what about the effect on productivity?
Every few years, I would end up being off sick and sometimes never actually knowing what the major problem was. I was just really unwell. They always put it down to my kidney, but often they never really found a reason for it. Now, with more knowledge, since doing my coach training and a lot more work on myself, I've realized that actually those sections of time with that, I pushed myself to the limit. I cared for everybody around me, but I didn't take care of me in the way that would have been more beneficial.
So, what was the solution for you? Do I take it this is where personal self care comes into its own?
Absolutely. And that was the thing that really struck me when I trained as a coach. The way that we trained was we had to be coached through what we would expect to coach somebody else through. And in the process of doing that, self care was the central part of the work that I did with this coach training. But that was a real challenge because the self-care was me, whereas I was so used to looking after everybody else and putting everybody else first. But to actually realize that if I started looking after me as a priority, I could actually care for more people in a much more beneficial way that was a big eye-opener for me.
All right, let's focus on the training for a moment, because as far as I'm aware, it occurred around about the time of the pandemic. And now, 5 years on, you're a qualified coach. Congratulations. But in terms of the training itself, from what I can gather from our conversations, it's fashioned on 5 key principles. Briefly, if you would, walk me through those 5 key aspects of the training and how you felt they prepared you for the journey ahead.
So the company that I actually did my coach training with is called One of Many, and they're a women's leadership organization. But all of the work I've done with men as well. Fairly unique way of doing their coach training. They use 5 women's power types. And those 5 power types are the queen, the lover, the mother, the warrioress, and the sorceress. And those power types are each part of who you are. Each one of those can be translated for a male as well. So you've got the king, the sorcerer, the warrior, and you don't need to be a father or a mother to tap into the part of you that is your mother or father power type. I've got a friend who doesn't have children, but she is very much high mother because she mothers everybody. She looks after everyone. The way that we trained was to use these power types to consider how we tap into them to really ensure that we get the best out of who we are.
And you looked
Now,
at core competencies, didn't you, I would imagine?
we did. We had core competencies that were part and parcel of the International Coaching Federation competencies. And that's an international organization that we are now affiliated with my coach training. And you know, some of those competencies are ensuring about the relationship with the client, obviously confidentiality and trust and intimacy, that sort of thing. So some of those core competencies that are really important are active listening, the powerful questioning, and direct communication. So ensuring that you have the powerful questioning is so important, but also the active listening. With the training that we did, we had to be coached by somebody else. So all of the work that I do with somebody, I've already been through a program of coaching in a very similar way. Now, each person's very individual, but I have done those things. So when I'm asking people to consider journaling and gratitude and doing things like that to really build up their power types, then I've been there and I've done that.
And you mentioned earlier that part of the training involves getting the best out of the client. Tell me more.
It's getting to the point of being able to tap into the part of you that enables you to do whatever you're doing. So if you're maybe in a work situation, maybe you're going into an interview. One of the things I like to say to people is tapping into Queen if you're going, or to King when you're going into an interview. So you imagine your king, or imagine a king or queen. What we would encourage a coaching client to have is an image, but I will always go and ask people to go and find their own that really work for them, because how I visualize Queen isn't necessarily how somebody else is going to visualize Queen.
And I suppose finding the middle ground is equally important here, because if one isn't careful, they could end up blowing this out of all proportion, where they end up gaining an exaggerated sense of self, this air of superiority, bordering on ostentatious, which would end up being counterproductive rather than productive, I would imagine.
And that's really important because there's 2 levels to all of these. So you've got your overexpressed queen or sorceress or lover or mother, and you've got your underexpressed. So what we do, we work with people to find where that middle ground is, to actually embody that middle ground. We will look at what the overexpressed queen might look like and an underexpressed queen might look like, and then we'll get to really embody it. So we dial up We dial it right up to get into that overexpress so you can feel it. So if you're in a situation where you're getting to that overexpressed, where you are being domineering and you're crushing other people because you are so sure of your own ideas that actually you're not allowing space for anybody else, then once you start to feel that space, when you get into that place when you're in your normal daily working or living life, then you can start to acknowledge it and feel it and see it.
Wow.
Then we get you to dial down to that underexpressed place, what it feels like to be disempowered in that underexpressed queen. Part of the training is ensuring that you can create a vision for that person so they know where they want to go. When they know where they want to go, it's having a positive way forward. One of the things that we look at is sort of your towards motivation rather than an away from motivation. If you want to get fit and you want to get fit so you can look after your grandkids or play with your kids, then that's a really positive motivation rather than being, I don't want to be in that place. And that for me is what's really good about coaching, is that you're helping somebody see what their future could be like and can actually see that as a positive thing, that this is where I want to be. And if I can achieve that, like self-care, if I can really look after myself first, then actually I can look after more people.
You know, Angela, that's been most insightful. Thank you very much indeed. Particularly around self-care, have really been beneficial for me. And really, I'd like to end today by looking at another final aspect of your journey in this context, and that's the grieving process. Now, we're not talking about grieving in particular for people you'd lost dear to you, but this is around the loss of kidneys and the uncertainty around, in the initial instance, of your son and his prematurity, and the fact that he was on oxygen for 2.5 years, and all that brought with it, and everything else in between. And it's been a step at a time, and I have to admire you for your courage and bravery in taking those steps. So maybe you could tell us, A, why the grieving process was essential, and B, how it led you to a realization of the thing that made the once impossible possible. And I'm pretty confident self-care plays a huge part in all of this.
That's a really interesting question, Philip, to be honest. The loss that I had, you have a life that you plan ahead. If we were lucky enough to have children, my husband was going to stop at home and look after our children, and I was going to have a career in nursing, and I was going to become a matron, and I was going to do all of these things because I got married in 1991, and by 12 months later, my son was born. And he was born 3 months premature, and my kidneys failed at that point. And any plans I may have had prior to getting married, and the vision of my future, went out of the window in the first 12 months of marriage. I was in renal failure, so I was dialysing eventually. And at that point, I didn't stop and think about any thought of, oh, I'm missing a life that I had planned, because you were just trying to hold on with your fingernails to the life you actually had.
Oh, indeed, but come to a realization you did, and you eventually, started grieving for that lost time, the missed opportunities, and the loss of your kidneys. Tell me, what did that grieving process look like for you, and why was it necessary?
It's multiple things. The challenges we have in life can often be very cyclical, as I realised for me, my burnout sessions were quite cyclical. And to actually start to unpick the reasons for being in that position and getting myself to burnout started to make me realise, had I actually stopped to really consciously consider the challenges that I'd lived with, the traumas that I'd lived with. I had a transplant that failed. There was a loss there. I grieved somebody that donated their kidney to me that I never knew, but they gave me the opportunity of life. I was diagnosed with breast cancer at one point as well. I grieved then and started to understand that I hadn't grieved the fact that life had changed for me so dramatically, has opened up a space within me to really accept me for who I am and to be able to give myself that opportunity to stop and say, you know what, it was really, really tough. So being able to grieve those things gets me to a point where I am far more open in my acknowledgement of those challenges, but forgiving of myself, because we can be very harsh on ourselves, which can be a real challenge for us.
Oh, Angela, may I say a huge thank you to you for being an absolute superstar in coming on the podcast today and sharing with us your compelling story.
Thank you, Philip.
Oh, you're very welcome. And if I may, like to just share with you one or two of the takeaways for me today. The power of the human spirit, it should be noted, should never really be underestimated. And throughout your journey, you've displayed some remarkable qualities of strength, determination, bravery, courage, tenacity. And earlier we were talking about you being a survivor. Then we have self-care. It's taught you a lot about your personal boundaries, and you've learnt to say no. Plus, it's been good for your productivity in as much that you now know how to care for yourself and balance that with the care you offer to others without going into burnout. And then we have community, the people who were guiding you from the darkness into the light when you yourself felt as though you had nothing to offer. And last but not least, your hubby, who donated one of his kidneys so that you may have a second chance at a life. And look what you've achieved in the 24 years of receiving that. And proof that the impossible is possible. So very well done, with my sincere best wishes.
Thank you, Philip.
Now, the moment you've been waiting for, Angela. You may remember me saying to you how there was a special surprise coming your way, but you'd have to wait for the podcast release date to hear it. Well, that moment has arrived. This is just for you. Enjoy with our love.
Angela Peake is an extraordinary woman. She wouldn't tell you that she is, but she really is. The way that she supports people, cares for people, nurtures them, and really inspires them with her encouragement and support and love is phenomenal. And I have been one of the very grateful beneficiaries of that very same love and care myself. I think it's amazing that she's transitioning from healthcare work into supporting healthcare professionals with their own self-care so that they can pour from a full cup. It's so important. So my deepest thanks to Angela for all of her love, support and care, and I can't wait to see where life takes you next.
Angela, I hope you liked that. Trudy McGuinness, thank you very much indeed. How we managed to keep that surprise from Angela all this while is amazing. I just happened to say to her that there was a surprise coming her way on the podcast, but you'll have to wait and see on the day. So I just left that air of intrigue hovering over her like the sword of Damocles, I suppose. So hope you enjoyed that, Angela. And again, many thanks indeed, Trudy, for rising to the occasion. And I'd like to wish you both all the best. And a video version of Trudy McGuinness's testimonial, along with this episode, Impossible is Possible, is available for you to enjoy from the talkingpoint.site website. Where still to come?
If I've got a radio that's got no built-in speech at all, trying to get to the part where you type in your frequency would be an absolute no-go. It'd be virtually impossible. So having built-in screen readers in radios has revolutionised the hobby for a lot of blind ham radio operators.
Martin Rhodes on the transformative power of amateur radio. And
we here as a charity obviously must recognise that we're here to support those obviously living with sight loss. We also have to recognise and understand our own ability as a charity to provide obviously that service and to continue, more importantly, to provide that service.
The future of the British Wireless for the Blind Fund. We hear from the charity's Head of Technology, David Beard.
We've been going since 1929, and I'm sure there was not 2 million people who were living with sight loss in the UK at that point. And we just simply are not capable of obviously supporting all of them.
But first, more of your testimonials. For today we are profiling your stories of the things that made the once impossible possible. Already we've heard from E.O. Davis and her remarkable account of how Smartbox enabled her to regain her independence as someone living with cerebral palsy. Now it's the turn of Jenny Tate, whose discovery of the Dragon Naturally Speaking software 20 years ago aided her in completing her honours degree with the Open University. Her story is voiced for us today by Sarah Pascal.
Since embarking on an honours degree journey with the Open University in 2006, I've been harnessing the power of Dragon voice activation technology. This indispensable tool became necessary due to the impacts on my hands and upper limbs from Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and fibromyalgia, further compounded by the challenges posed by dyslexia. Without voice activation, it would have halted my academic ambitions entirely. Thankfully, Dragon offered a pathway not just to continue, but to flourish. In 2008, as I ventured into volunteering as a radio presenter and later transitioned into music reviewing, Dragon remained a steadfast ally and enabler. Although my time as a radio presenter concluded in 2011, my engagement in music reviewing has thrived, with Dragon's voice activation technology at the heart of this enduring passion. This invaluable tool has facilitated my ongoing contributions to the music scene, enriching my experiences and interactions. It has also empowered me to articulate my fervour for rock and metal music, fostering a sense of significant achievement. In addition, it has sustained my connections within the music community and allowed me to express my enthusiasm for rock and metal in a tangible way. It has supported my pride in my voluntary activities, infused my days with structure and purpose, and offered solace from physical constraints. Moreover, Dragon's voice activation has enabled me to overcome some of these limitations. The act of vocalizing my thoughts injects my words with energy and clarity, amplifying my passion for the music. Utilizing my voice as an instrument not only maintains my functional capabilities, but continuously rekindles my love for the music I review, lending an additional voice to the music itself. Over time, this sustained practice has bolstered my confidence, an invaluable progression for someone facing progressive conditions like mine, which tend to undermine self-assurance. Embracing assistive technology that guarantees I retain my voice has become a cornerstone of maintaining my abilities and fueling my motivation to persist in what I cherish most. Dragon's role has not just been a tool, but a lifeline, enabling me to transcend my physical limitations and fully embrace my passions.
Sarah Pascal with Jenny Tate's compelling account on the Dragon Naturally Speaking software, whose testimonial, along with others you've heard today, can be found on the talkingpoint.site website. Just search for this episode, Impossible is Possible. Do you remember the first time you listened to radio? Maybe it was in the car, or at home, or perhaps like me, when a mere child. In my case, BBC for Schools and Radio 4's Saturday Night Theatre sparked my young imagination. While for others, radio was more than just a sound. It was the voice of a friend, a motto later adopted by hospital radio in years gone by. Maybe you feel the same. It is a companion filling the quiet, easing the loneliness. Whether you're one of the 12% who still listens to AM radio, or have embraced digital platforms like BBC Sounds. Radios have indeed evolved with us, from the old sets to the smart speaker, with 50% of us Brits tuning in every week, and the Americans bucking this trend at 92% for the same period. Yet, conversely, how crucial does radio become for someone, say, who has lost their sight? For almost 100 years, the British Wireless for the Blind Fund have made sure that its members still have that voice of a friend. And today we'll discover how this almost century-old charity remains so relevant. Join me therefore as we welcome their Head of Technology, David Beard, to share with us how their radio sets have become friends for countless thousands over the years. David, a very warm welcome.
Hello, Phil. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, David. Thank you very much indeed for asking, and thank you for agreeing to come on the programme and talk to us today. Now, the British Wireless for the Blind is a national charity. You're almost 100 years old, providing services for persons with sight loss. Now, the clue's in the name, but perhaps you could elaborate a little bit by explaining what it is you actually provide your members.
So we're looking at a range of services that go from our standard radios, so that's a physical DAB FM radio. It may do other things and play CDs and tapes and memory sticks, as well as our online stream service that just simply unlocks the internet and makes things accessible and also usable, more importantly.
And that's important, isn't it? Accessibility is key here.
It is, yeah, and also that phrase "usable" is key as well, because just because a pathway is accessible or it's the thing put in front of you doesn't always mean that it's usable. So we like to ensure that both those components are really clearly met.
And usable is an interesting phrase. What do you mean by that in this context?
I mean that the user can use it in all instances. I mean that the user doesn't come across frustrations from pop-ups, for example, in standard environments. So we ensure that not only is it accessible, but we remove the frustration of using it.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you. There's obviously more to accessibility than just making a product available, as you were saying there, which brings us nicely on to an interesting point about suitability and determining the right set and service for your individual members. Maybe you could walk us through the process here, taking into account the varying degrees of sight loss and technological proficiencies.
Yeah, very good question. And actually, it's a lot easier a decision than you might potentially think. The most important point is, what do you want to do with it? What do you need it to do for you? So we currently have access still to a bespoke radio set called Concerto. It plays CDs, tapes, memory sticks. It has a DAB and FM radio. So it fits, one size fits all. It does everything. All of the radios provide exactly that same accessibility and usability for someone who has some useful vision, all the way through to someone who has no useful vision. All of our radios have the same tactile markings and functions on them that would be supportive to anyone who was not going to use any useful sight. None of our radios, unfortunately, talk. That would be a love, but because of the dynamic format of devices that talk to you needing to be connected to the internet, we kind of negate the ability to have any radios that are going to talk to us. Other than a radio that has a pre-recorded message in it that says play when you press a button for play, for example. All of our radios require setup. So we are providing the radio to the individual and then always asking, how do you want that radio set up? Can you do it yourself? And we give you support over the phone to do that. Do we need to tell a colleague of yours, a friend, a family member, a next door neighbour, whoever that may well be, how to do that? We need to send someone to you if we have that obviously option available? That's not always available in every part of the UK because the UK is so wide and so varied in its geography. We'd love just to be able to set it up in factory and just have, I don't know, like the most 5 favourite radio stations predetermined, or even suggest that we ask you which ones you want. The problem is that the DAB multiplexes determine the frequencies on DAB, DAB+, And obviously then the frequency on FM is particular to your area, so it can only be tuned in the local area.
And what about your user demographics and the way that they consume radio content? You mentioned you offer a range of services from online to portable radio sets. What's the general split here in terms of who's listening online and who's listening via your portable radios?
Currently, at this moment in time, I believe we have the low thousands, a couple of thousand people using our online services. And we have 40,000 people using our physical radios. That we hope in the next 5 years we'll see a major shift, and we will have as many people using our online services as we do using digital services. And that's why we're really trying to ask at the moment the question around what are people doing and where's the need hole, so that we can continue to support them in the best way and rightly in the way that they need us to.
All right, well, do hold that thought if you would, because your vision for the future is something I would like us to look at in a moment. But before we do, I'd like for us to focus on your charity's history, if I may, as there's an interesting story associated with British Wireless for the Blind Fund and how it all came to be established. You were set up in the main to cater for the needs of soldiers returning from World War I who had been blinded in combat, using what we would call today primitive radio technology to keep them informed of news from the forces, which I thought was quite a visionary move for the time. Not only were you connecting them with the outside world, but you were providing them with a companion, building communities. Because let's face it, people returning from the battlefield in World War I wouldn't be coming home to creature comfort, say today's soldiers injured in battle could expect. And so radio would have been a huge lifeline for them back then. How much of that is part of today's vision? I mean, does it still include provisions for soldiers blinded in modern combat, or does it include all aspects of sight loss these days?
Well, I think it's really easy to kind of actually, first of all, reflect on the beautiful history that British Wireless for the Blind Fund has had, since 1928 in its inception, with a man, Captain Towers, who was blinded in the Great War. Her and his friends came in and rigged a radio up to a radiator, and he obviously kind of, found the idea of British Wireless for the Blind Fund then, and, the King at that time, and obviously Winston Churchill were great promoters of this. The famous saying that Winston Churchill said, if the blind can't see, we must rescue them from the darkness. Was said on national radio, as it was then, on Christmas Day from Chartwell, calling for funds for British Wireless for the Blind Fund. And I must reflect, actually, that we have a room in our offices in Maidstone. We call it the resource room, and it has every radio that the British Wireless for the Blind Fund has ever provided. And for me and for the charity, we really see that as the importance of the vehicle itself, whether it was an original Braille radio, crystal set, or whether it was the latest concerto. But the importance of the whole element is the community that British Wireless for the Blind Fund creates. And you also mentioned another phrase, and that was a companion. We see that our radios become a friend for the individuals. We've obviously had to see a number of changes, obviously, over the years that, have just been led by the vision of the charity, really, to reduce loneliness and to reduce isolation, which is our number one focus really still today. But it's been around that long because it's been able to reshape and repurpose the need of the individuals. You talked about community. Community is everyone. It isn't just those who are of a particular definition or the reason why they lost their sight. We're here to listen. It's prided itself on that. We're a micro charity. We employ 12 people currently and one person who is contracted as our account person. Yet we have a national reach. We cover every single postcode from AB to ZE. And everything in the middle, all the Highlands and Islands, all the whole Jersey, Guernsey, the whole kit and caboodle. And more importantly, our relevance in the market currently is that we've listened, to the needs of the individuals. Certainly we've had to have a qualifying criteria because we just cannot support the weight of everyone. There are 2 million people living with sight loss today. We asked for the radios, the physical sets to be given. that individuals are living with a recognised sight condition nowadays. They don't even need to be registered, but they are on a means tested benefit, which then obviously reduces the number down and just allows us to support, obviously, those that are most in need.
Well, that's amazing. It certainly aligns with our theme today of making the once impossible possible. An almost 100-year solution, you could say, providing companionship and community to those otherwise living in isolation. And tell me, how long has it you've been a part of this charity's remarkable history you so eruditely and passionately outlined for us here?
So I've been with the charity for 13 years this year, and initially I joined as a volunteer. I was at kind of a bridge in my own life and trying to make decisions around what it is that I wanted to do next. And the charity, after the first year, employed me. I've done many different things there. First of all, I kind of looked after the agent side of things, as we used to call it, which was where we would use local agencies, some social services, and county councils to deliver our radios. And when the pandemic came along, the organisation completely reshaped, and I became the leader of the technology projects at that point in time. I was originally a project manager with Scottish Widows, which became Scottish Widows from the previous background of Black Horse Financial Services. Many people will remember those changes and those acquisitions, obviously through Scottish Widows and Lloyds TSB. I was part of a remuneration team that looked after the entire Lloyds TSB network sales force and dealt with many of the issues that came from all of the systems that were glued together. Very interesting, and kind of obviously then bring a reflection of data analysis, which is something that I've kind of is close to my heart. Nowadays, I have grown really more into a management role and a senior management role, obviously now within British Wireless for the Blind Fund. And as I obviously said before, I look after all of the strategy and the direction that the charity is going to try and offer, and how we obviously negate that minefield of the need holes of the individuals, and therefore what we can produce to ensure that we are providing the best service, as well as the management of individuals as well.
Well, the charity is in safe hands by the sounds of things, given your requisite skills and background, which is good news for all concerned, and that you can move forward now into this new phase of your development with confidence. And your vision is something I want us to end on in a moment. But before I do, I want to just pick you up on a point you mentioned earlier regarding criteria. And you were saying how your services are provided to members free. This is the radio sets and your online radio streaming services. They don't necessarily have to be registered blind, but they obviously have to have sight loss of some description. But they do have to be on a means-tested benefit. What's the rationale behind this thinking, and how might it, say, impact others with sight loss who may not meet these requirements?
It's a really important point, Phil, because we here as a charity obviously must recognise that we're here to support those obviously living with sight loss. But in the same regard, we also have to recognise and understand our own ability as a charity to provide obviously that service, and to continue, more importantly, to provide that service. I think that's the important point there, because we've been going since 1929, and I'm sure there was not 2 million people who were living with sight loss in the UK at that point. But that's the point where we find ourselves today, that there are 2 million people living with sight loss in the UK. And we just simply are not capable of obviously supporting all of them. And we're quite open with that. We must recognise that, we have our limitations. We are here to support those that are living with sight loss. And more importantly, here to provide a radio set to those who are on a means tested benefit. And it's not our decision whether that individual qualifies, just the criteria that we request. There will always be someone who obviously falls outside of that criteria, but ultimately we have the criteria to ensure that we protect those that are most in need,
yes.
And those that are obviously are on a means tested benefit.
You say it's not your decision that someone has to be on a means tested benefit in order to qualify for your radio services. So who did decide it?
The sheer number determines that, really. We would love to be able to support all 2 million people, but we're just physically not in a position to do that. And it would be, wrong for us to, consider that we could just carry on regardless and just try and support everyone, because that may obviously well bring the charity to an end. We assess the number all of the time. You know, if we look at how many people we have currently out there with radios, we're looking at around about 40,000 people. And we're looking to provide between 3,000 and 5,000 sets every year. We've continued to do that. So clearly, if we ever got to a point where, I don't know, the number had been 500 in one year, then we may really need to reassess that.
But what about somebody who, say, might be in work but in receipt of working person's tax credit? Might they qualify or not?
Yeah, well, look, don't forget, working tax credits is a means tested benefit. You know, there are many council tax allowance is a means tested benefit. So, you know, there are many people in many groups that could still be supported, obviously with a radio that is free, obviously through the charity. And like I say, we really aren't here to determine the number of people overall that obviously we can support. We just have a really clear criteria, and that just states that they must be on a means tested benefit. That just ensures that we can continue to support everyone who comes to us who obviously qualifies in that regard.
Ah, that's an interesting point you make there. And so it would pay people just to check what benefits they're on in case it is means tested and they weren't aware of that. So do check your benefits, and it's possible that you could still end up qualifying. But just to be clear, if it is that somebody's been used to, receiving your services for quite some time, they're on a means tested benefit, they do qualify, but then that means tested benefit comes to an end, or they end up finding themselves in employment, does that mean then that their services with you will instantly be terminated? How does it work?
So every time a radio is requested, we simply ask that the criteria is reassessed. So we would not wish to question someone who has been given a radio if there is a change, because ultimately we've placed so much work in front of us to get that individual, obviously that radio. So we ensure that every time an individual comes to us, that criteria is reassessed.
Are there any mitigating circumstances whereby, say, an assessment is carried out and it's found at that point that the person is no longer on a means tested benefit, but that the service ends up continuing?
So we really wish as a charity to ensure that one rule fits all, and we always consider the needs of the charity and the needs of the individuals, obviously, that we're supporting. So everybody gets fair treatment. The rule is applied in every regard, in every instance, for everyone that comes to us, whether that's the first time or the 10th time potentially requesting the radio.
So no is the answer to that then. The moment a person's benefit should come to an end, that means tested benefit, that is, so too would their subscription to British Wireless as well. Okay, well, moving on and looking at your vision for the future, because this is one of the other reasons why we've invited you on, is to talk to us about where the charity is headed. One thing that's interesting to note is you've been a part of the radio revolution for almost as long as the BBC. So you're coming up for 100 years in a couple of years' time. BBC came on board in 1922, British Wireless 1928. So, you've gone through all the various stages of the revolution, which is why I think it's good that you've got this excellent resource room in your offices in Kent with almost every radio you've ever provided. I bet that's a fascinating study in itself. And if ever I'm down in Kent, I would love to drop in on you guys and have a look at that. It really would be fascinating. It would take me back, because I know of the various radios I've had myself. I mean, my very first radio was a Roberts radio, I do believe, and that was courtesy of British Wireless for the Blind, going back many, many years. I'm talking 1975. So, yeah, I digress. But your vision, it's very interesting. So you are now entering your next 100 years. Well, you shall be very, very shortly. Online is where you see it headed at the moment. But as things stand, your demographic split is that you've got more people subscribing to your portable radio sets than you have those to your online streams. But you're hoping that that will change. How can your listeners help you shape the future going forward? What is it you're looking for them to assist you with in this regard?
Yes, thank you, Philip, for allowing us to kind of bring this to you. So, British Wireless for the Blind Fund is currently looking to understand a simple question, and that's how users navigate their own online audio and information journey. And what we mean by that is, how do you access radio online? How do you do it? When do you do it? Where do you do it? What do you do it with? What issues do you have? What navigation problems do you come across? What would you like to be easier? Do you have ideas and solutions potentially that you could, already pose to us to solve some of the problems that you're experiencing? And we really want to try and conduct as many interviews with individuals on a one-to-one basis to kind of understand them as an individual and their sight loss journey. And then also obviously understand their audio online journey so that we can bring that information to allow us to find our relevance and find that need hole in the market and to understand what we do next. We already have 2 applications in the market, both called Speech. One's called Speech Radio, providing access to worldwide radio, as we've already said. And one's called Speech Talking Newspaper. We work very closely with local talking newspaper organisation and TNF, Talking News Federation, who support all them organisations. So that's all your local talking newspapers that provide access to local talking news across the country every week. That's a spoken newspaper read in human voice by someone. I'm very happy for anyone to contact me personally. My email is Dave, D-A-V-E, at blind, blind.org.uk. Or you can contact me direct on 01622 427 630.
Oh, thank you very much indeed, David. That's been an absolute pleasure today. Thank you.
No, thank you, Philip. It's been amazing and it's been a lovely journey. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and maybe wish you and all your team all the very best there. That was David Beard, Head of Technology over at the British Wireless for the Blind Fund. And if it is you'd like to be part of their next chapter, shaping the next 100 years, I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. Full details are available either from the talkingpoint.site website by just looking for this episode, Impossible is Possible, or by Googling British Wireless for the Blind Fund. All right, well, we've reached the final feature of the programme today, and it's a new one. It's all about listeners' passions, so yes, it involves you. And we're interested in the things that fire you up, the things that really get you going. It can be anything from a hobby like train spotting, bird watching, playing a musical instrument, art, including drawing, writing, whatever it is you enjoy, do get in touch. Mine happens to be antiques, and I love antique furniture. My particular period is either Edwardian or Victorian, and even though I have no vision, I love furniture that has intricate detail in it. And my late friend, who sadly passed away in April of this year, and I used to really enjoy doing the antique fairs, and he picked me up a wonderful Victorian antique desk at the Oxford Antique Fair a couple of years ago, just before he died, and it's now reposing in my living room, and it's full of intricate detail, and just laying my fingers on that really sets my adrenaline going and my imagination reeling, and before you know it, I'm transported back in time. And I happen to know a little bit about the history of the desk, and it was originally owned by 2 people, from what I can gather. One was a solicitor, and another was a clergyman. And I can picture this desk in a clergyman's study. And there is one drawer in particular out of the 8, which I have not opened because it's the only drawer that comes without a handle on the front. but I'm wary about opening it in case there's something in there I don't like. So, of course, I'm interested in your passions, the things that really excite you, and I'd love to feature them from time to time on the podcast. You can get in touch by sending a text or a voice note to 07948 568 191 or email info@talkingpoint.site. Well, the first of our listener passions comes from a familiar person, somebody you already know, who's been on this show many a time. He's my co-presenter, Martin Rhodes. And earlier this year, we got together and we're talking about a new feature we wanted to introduce to Talking Point. And he came up with the idea of listener passions, which I love. He happened to be asking me about mine, and I was telling him about my love of antique furniture, as I've just been sharing with you. And we got onto his, of course, which turns out to be amateur radio. And it's a fascinating story. So let's find out more about his passion and the places it's taken him.
Power on.
M7BHP, Mike 7 Bravo Hotel Popper. Just looking for an audio report, please, for demonstration purposes. M7BHP. Started off with a shortwave radio and thoroughly enjoyed using that. And he got me into sort of scanning different frequencies. And I used to make antennas out of bits of foil and all sorts of things, and string wire antennas up in my bedroom walls and all kinds of things. I wonder what it'd be like if I got a helium balloon, got some coaxial cable, tied it to it, and just let it go up. Like put a PL plug on the end of it, connect that to a radio, and just let it go up. And I thought, I wonder how well it'd get out. So I tried it, and it worked really well, actually. People could see it for miles. It was quite something.
Could have put some advertising on there and got people to sponsor it.
I probably could. I'm in a ground floor flat, so it's a very, very scaled down shack. It's a couple of radios in the corner of my living room at the minute. It's like I can't even put any outdoor attenuation up or anything at the minute. I've got what we call a dipole, basically an indoor wire antenna, just to the left of my curtain rail. That tunes up on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, which are two of the main ham bands most people use here in the UK. It's something that's in me blood. So because I started playing with shortwave radio so young, I never looked back, really. For me, it's the conditions, and like especially if you want to do international contacting, like the sunspots have to be right, and the solar flux levels have to be right, and the ionisation, like the gas ionisation levels have to be right. Things like the ionosphere. Because I come from quite a technical background, as some of you may or may not know, that's why I think I've got such an interest in it as well. You're relying on antenna to antenna communication. You're relying on the weather, the sunspots, everything. There's so many different contributing factors to it. Whereas with WhatsApp, all I need is an internet connection. Go, oh yeah, are you there? Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, you. Yeah, can you hear me? You know what I mean? It takes the fun away from it for me. If you're licensed at intermediate level, you can make you can homebrew your own kit, you can make your own antennas, you can make your own transceivers if you want to.
So where are you going with it then?
At the moment, I'm licensed at foundation level. I am looking at getting my intermediate license, but at the moment, where I'm situated, I can't really put any antennas up or anything. So I'm at a stage at the minute where there's not much point me carrying on until I can, if that makes sense.
This is K9OJ on FM analog, and I'll be switching to Yaesu's system.
There's 3 levels of licensing. There's foundation, there's intermediate, and then there's the full license. So the exam's £50. The license, once you've proved you passed your exam, your license is then issued to you by Ofcom. So once that's issued to you, then that's it. You're away.
And we must bear in mind that the license covers you, the person, and not the equipment.
Absolutely, yeah, it does. Yeah, it covers the operator. Yeah. You learn what you call operating procedures, so you learn about what frequencies to transmit and receive on. You learn about etiquette, so what should be said, what shouldn't be said. Antenna impedance, so which antennas work best on different bands, which type of coaxial cables work with different antennas. And then at the end of this, so you do a little course, and on the end of that, there's a 26-question multiple choice exam that you have to do.
So sort of the driver's license.
Basically, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, because
so you do the theory and the practical.
You do the theory and the practical, yeah, because you're learning to. You're basically driving your radio. That's what they call it. They call it driving your radio. But very similar to European computer driving license. Yeah, well, that was the thing.
Yeah. Because you did that with the Open University, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. I thought you did. Did that enthuse you? Enthuse you even more?
It did, yeah, because I thought, well, I can transfer an already discovered skill set to something new. I got my first CB radio at age 13, and after that I never looked back really. I mean, I've always enjoyed talking to people, I've always been a natural communicator, and I enjoy chatting to people.
This is M7BHP, Mike 7 Bravo Hotel Popper.
Mike 7 BHP, this is Kilo Charlie 1, Uniform Bravo Papa from...
Then I got into what we call DXing, which is like contacting people internationally. So I've got a folder at home, it's like a folio, like a portfolio, full of different cards. They call QSL cards. It's like a collectible card to say that you spoke to this particular station at this particular time. They send you a card with their working conditions, so they might say, "Oh, I'm using a Kenwood such and such or a Yaesu FT such and such radio." They send you what radio they're using. You send them what radio you're using and the kind of antenna you're using and things like that. And it's just something to keep. It's a collectible. It's something to keep, you know. People were even doing that during this on the CB days as well. People used to send each other cards, and especially for local CB, they used to do something called. They used to call it an eyeball. And basically, what it was is just a group of guys who would talk to each other locally on the radio. They'd meet up at like a local pub and perhaps have a couple of drinks. Or I like that old school sort of let's meet in person, have face-to-face communication. To me, I think CB was one of the original forms of social media.
CQ, this is KI4CFS in Raleigh, North Carolina. Can you hear me? Kilo India 4 Charlie Foxtrot Sierra.
It's a very multifaceted hobby. There's many different ways you can enjoy it. In the States, that they have a blind hams hub. They have what they call a net, and they get together on a Saturday afternoon and discuss the pros and cons of the hobby and what's developing, what's evolving, what's working, what isn't, and it's quite good. It's quite an interesting listen. I have been to some of the local radio clubs in the past where they meet on a Thursday evening at the Foxfield Railway. They'll sit and talk about radio, sometimes just an excuse to get out of the house for a while and have a coffee and a cake and just a bit of a chat about this, that and the other. And, you talk about your family and your lives.
But you've all got one thing in common.
Yeah.
You're both, you're all ham radio operators.
We're all ham radio operators. And when we go there, we might talk about software we've been playing with. We might even go into the shack, because most clubs have their own club call sign. So, we might go into the shack and play radio. We might not go anywhere near it. We might just go and just sit and talk. But there might not be any radio involved at all. It brings people together, and it's filled a void for a lot of people who may not have got out that much, or they may not have a big friendship circle. So
is that true in your case?
Well, I've always had a relatively decent friendship circle, but I've met friends through the hobby who I've met up with in real life, and I've been out, been out for a drink with, that kind of thing. And yeah, I've got friends who live locally. Got a couple of friends who live further afield who I've met up with through the hobby, and had I not have got into it, I'd never met them,
73s, anyone, anywhere, November, X-ray 8 Tango.
Mike 5, Alpha, Juliet, November, mobile.
I've also got just an interest in listening to people's conversation as well, because I always think, obviously, if you're visually impaired, one of the main things that you find out about things is through your ears. So
you're a nosy fucker.
Basically, yeah. Pretty much. I mean, I was born early.
Oh, yes, so you were.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? So, yeah. I guess,
it rather tells, really.
It does, really.
So do you find yourself eavesdropping more than you're participating?
Yes, I do. I do listen a lot. I've just given my brother. My brother's just moved in a few floors above me. So I've just given him a walkie-talkie. We've got a couple of walkie-talkies that we play with sometimes. And we just put them on and we just shout to each other occasionally on them and just...
Do you have your own call signs for them?
Well, no, because you don't need to, because you can just shout anything at you.
I wasn't sure whether you were going to actually adopt the ham radio protocol there.
No, not on there, no, not on 446, but yeah, it's a bit of fun. It's good.
So in front of me, I have the Baofeng UV5R handheld amateur radio set.
I like to know what radios work with screen reading software, what doesn't.
6, that's 6, 6, 6, 5, 6, 4.
This has a built-in screen reader. There's a volume knob at the top to turn it on and off. So I'm going to turn it on.
Some of the high-end transceivers, like the Kenwoods, for example, they've got a built-in speech chip in it. When you type in the frequency you want to go to, it will tell you the frequency. It will tell you the mode that you're on. It will tell you how much power you're running out of the radio. So when you key up, it'll say, you are running 100 watts.
Frequency mode.
There's also a button on the left-hand side of the unit that allows me to toggle between channel mode and then frequency mode. So, for example, let's say I wanted to go to
14550.
145.500, which is the 2 meters calling frequency. I could do.
Even some of the lower-end radios, like the more budget radios, the handhelds, they've also got built-in speech as well.
Power on.
A lot of things that are accessible are made accessible by accident. I think some of it was thought through, but a lot of it was done just by accident. But there are certain radios that you can buy with built-in screen readers, especially digital ones. I've got a couple of analog ones that have as well. There's also some ham radio software that you can get for for Windows, for a Windows or Mac computer, which also works with most of your screen readers. So it'll work with VoiceOver for Mac, it'll work with NVDA and JAWS for Windows, for example. A lot of them are menu driven, so trying to get to the part where you type in your frequency would be an absolute no-go. It'd be virtually impossible. So having built-in screen readers and radios has revolutionised the hobby for blind ham radio operators.
Alpha Kilo X-ray Lottie, good evening. You're 5x9, over.
Good evening, and you are 5x9. Nice signal here into Minnesota. The name is Larry, Lima Alpha Radio Yankee, over.
What I will say about ham radio operators is they're very helpful, and 9 times out of 10 they will look out for each other. So, for example, somebody might say, I need a microphone for this, or I need a PL plug for this antenna, or that. Oh yeah, I'll drop it round tomorrow, and they'll just drop it round for you. Or and I need a mic rewiring. Oh, okay, I've got a soldering iron here. I can do you that, and they'll just do it for you. It's a very community-based thing, and I think that's because it's such a small community, especially over here in the UK. I mean, there's a lot of hams, but nowhere near as many as there is, say, in the US. My interpretation of ham radio is it's a medium or a source that would be available for people to radio through to others if there was ever like a huge EMP or like a massive power outage or a huge internet outage where people couldn't communicate. The fact that there's people out there who've got batteries charged up and handheld radios and fully fledged home-based radios connected to quite large antennas. It would be a way for people to relay information to emergency services, for example, that kind of thing. It would be up to us hams, if you like, to maintain some sort of level of communication between people, and I think that's the original idea of it, really.
What else has ham radio given you?
An improved ability to articulate, a confidence that perhaps I may not have had before. It's also good for self-discipline as well. When you're on CB, you can say anything you like. There's no rules. If you want to queue up and tell somebody to piss off, you can. On radio, you don't. It's not written in your license clause, but you just don't swear. It's an unwritten rule. You just don't. Some are, some don't care. Some are a bit more lax about it, but they're not very by the book. But they still stick to protocol. You know what I mean? They're a bit out there, but they stick to protocol. So fair play to them.
Martin Rhodes with the first of our listener passions. And if it is you've got a passion and would like to share it with us, you can get in touch. The number you need, 07948 568 191, or you can email info@talkingpoint.site. Full details of how to get in touch is available on the talkingpoint.site website. Well, we're at the end of the programme. My thanks to all my guests today, Angela Peake, David Beard and Martin Rhodes, and to you, of course, for listening. And it's going to be a little bit of an hiatus before my next episode because I'm back at university at the end of this month, burying my head in philosophy and psychological studies. So I've got plenty to be going on with, but there's every possibility I'll be bringing out 1 or 2 shorts before the next epic episode, and it's not a picture of me actually wearing them, although I am at the present moment. Do give us a visit on our website at talkingpoint.site, and if it is you would like to send us any feedback or any suggestions for a future episode, you can do so by sending a voice note or text message to 07948 568 191 or by email info@talkingpoint.site. But for now, whatever it is you are doing, do it safely, and don't forget to subscribe wherever it is you happen to consume your media. We are on YouTube these days. I never thought I'd live the day to see that, but there you have it. Plus many other platforms, including Apple. But anyway, I will be back, whatever happens. Do look after yourselves. Thanks very much for all your support. I really do appreciate it. And don't forget to spread the word. But from all of us here on the team, take care for now. Bye-bye.